G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with bass player of the Dingoes, John Bois. After being in bands such as The New Dream and Country Radio, John joined the Dingoes in 1973. The band would go on to be known for their song Way Out West and being one of the first Aussie groups to attempt to make it in America. After making an album in Australia and 2 albums in the US, the group would disband in 1979. Today, John is a school teacher in the US and in 2012 wrote a book about his time in the band. You're born in 1950 in Hobart. What do you remember of growing up in Hobart? Yeah.
No, I grew up in Melbourne. I think my mother took me there to birth me for some reason. I don't know particularly why, but no, I was brought up in Melbourne.
What was Melbourne like growing up? Do you have any memories that pop up for you, like those early memories? Yeah.
Well, let's see. The first place I can remember was out in Clayton, where Monash University is out that way. And it was just very bare and, no trees growing, and it was very new development. And then we moved to Surrey Hills, hung out there until I got to be, playing in bands. And then I was all over the place.
In terms of your early childhood, what was the music you were growing up with? Yeah.
I think the radio was really it. And when you look at those, the radio playlists of, say, early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, they're so varied. You'll get Acapulco, and then the Rolling Stones, and also a lot of country music was on there. That I wasn't even aware that it was country music, but there was a lot of that there. Mostly that and church. I went to church and listened to the organ and the hymns. They're kind of influential, I suppose. Not much in school. I think Australian schools don't really did anyway. When I was there wasn't much going on in the schools. There might have been maybe a snare drum or something, and that would be it. Then you'd have a music lesson, and the teacher would put on a record and talk about it, but nothing really that struck home to your heart, kind of thing. And then I started, when I was old enough to start to go to clubs. I remember I saw the Easy Beats in North Balwyn there was a rec room there. Just incredible, just a great, rock and band. Oh my God, the rhythm guitar, just an incredible, strumming. I mean, the whole band, they were great. And I saw Ray Charles at the festival hall when I was 14. That was, I think, a life-changing event.
Well, how did you get into the bass? What inspired you in terms of that? Yeah.
I think it was my first band. We would play in a classroom, and other students would come from miles around to just listen, and they would comment on from miles away. They could hear the bass walking along. And then my mother got me to take stand-up bass lessons too, with the idea to be a classical musician. So learning with the bow, Our trouble with that was my teacher was Mr. Brasher, was his name, was Hungarian. And he escaped communist Hungary when Russia invaded, and he smuggled his bass out before his family. And his bass was the most beautiful, gentle kind of. But then when I got home, I had mine, and the strings of that were way off the fretboard, and I had to just muscle it on. It was not fun. So I generally just played electric bass.
It sounds like, from what you were saying just a little bit before, that New Dream wasn't your first group that you were part of, that you were part of other groups before that?
Yeah, I was in a really great blues band. It's called Chicago Piano, which was the name that the Chicago mobsters would give to a machine gun that they would fire. But it was a blues band. We had a great lead singer who just had an encyclopedic knowledge, and then the guitarist Russell Smith, who played in several bands, Company Cane and Mondo Rock and things like that. He was our guitarist, a brilliant guitarist. And so we were doing well. Then came the Vietnam War. Actually, it was there earlier, but our lead singer got drafted, and he couldn't handle it and wound up in a mental institution. And so that was pretty much the end of that band. And we were not getting, enough work for me to not have to work myself. So I just said, I've got to try and go professional. And I auditioned for the New Dream. Well, I think they were called the Dream then, but they were going to be the New Dream when I joined. I think the New Dream jumped on the bubblegum bandwagon. Previous to me, but including some of the stuff that we did, was a lot of R&B things like Your Love Has Lifted Me Higher, songs like that. So they had a pretty varied repertoire as well, but they were really happy that Alex, the leader of the band, was really kind of adamant to get top 40 play. And the way that we did that was to cover some of the bubblegum songs from the United States, which wasn't really fulfilling artistically. I got a lot of chops, I suppose, and they were good with the harmonies, singing harmonies. And so I got some experience with that, which when I joined country radio, we had a hit single, Gypsy Queen. And on that, I was instrumental in getting the harmonies going with that. And another song called Winter Song, which were pretty decent hits for us. And that was a great band. Kerryn Tolhurst got me into that band. And so I saw them at Sunbury. I forget which year it was, but they were playing and I was in the audience. And there were all these bands just being like sort of boogie bands, dun, 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 and heavy boogie all day, all night. And they came on and they were like a breath of fresh air. Kerryn was playing like a lap steel, playing mandolin, and Greg writing songs that were not 12-bar blues songs. So, and I didn't even dream of being in the band. One day, Kerryn was at some party or a ball or something, I don't know. New Dream was playing and he saw me and the way I play and said, would you like to join this band? I'm in country radio. I said, oh, shit, yeah. And so I took a train up to Sydney and auditioned and got in the band and just, that I really felt that was for me. After a while, a couple of years, everything kind of comes and goes. And Kerryn, I think, felt that band was kind of going. And, we kind of reached the limit, and it happened to a lot of Australian bands in Australia. A limit in Australia, because you've already played all the clubs and, you don't really have a fresh supply of songs coming all the time. And the natural thing to do is to try and go overseas. And country radio had, we really tried to do that. And we'd had a couple of near misses of getting overseas, but none of them panned out. And so Kerryn left to create the Dingoes, and he had started to write songs. He'd written Way Out West, I believe. He had actually co-written that song Gypsy Queen with Greg. And so he got his feet wet in country radio for songwriting as well. So he was writing his songs and wanted to have a whole band of his songs. And he wanted me to join, but I wanted to stay with Greg for a while. And then eventually I went to see the Dingoes, and I thought, oh, gee, that's a great rock and roll band. It's kind of where I want to be, And so I joined them.
I listened to the stuff you did with country radio, and you can hear glimpses of what would become the Dingoes. Would you say that's a fair comment? Like in Gypsy Queen you mentioned, and the album Country Radio Live. Like, would you say that's a fair comment? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the seed to that. I think we have to give Greg Quill a lot of praise on, being a songwriter, being more in the country vein, of telling a story, the instrumentation, quite different from just about all bands at that time. Without country radio, there would probably not be the Dingoes, I don't think. Oh, I don't know, who knows, but it would have been different. Country radio had a huge influence on Kerryn and me.
In saying that too, I mean, you talked about how you came to join the Dingoes a little bit earlier, and you guys get signed to Mushroom Records. I think you joined around August '73, if I've got that right. And you mentioned Way Out West as well. I mean, do you remember hearing that for the first time, like when Kerryn showed it to you for the first time, or anything like that? Yeah.
Oh yeah, in his living room. Yeah, even before he had finished it. Yeah. Hey John, what do you think of this? Yeah, okay, mate, it's okay. Yeah. I don't know that I fell head over heels about it. It's got legs though, hasn't it? I remember when we toured Australia after the Hall of Fame, we would play that tune and everybody in the audience knew it, and Broderick would do that trick of stop singing and the audience just sang it. And I thought, oh my God, it's like an anthem now, Yeah. And at the time, it was just a moderate hit. Yeah, it had staying power. And it's so Australian, isn't it? Kerryn had a voice, had a strong voice. And a talent, and he, hanging out with Greg, saw how it was done and just ran with it. And, he's still doing it. He's still recording and producing. He just did a great album. It's 1865, 1760. I forget what it's called. Anyway, so he's still doing that, and it's really fantastic. Yeah.
The first single, Way Out West, did it take long to come together in the studio, like to record? Yeah.
We did the whole album with John French at studios in Melbourne called TCS Studios. Now, so that was quick. In those days, we played everything live. Might have overdubbed some stuff. Yes, we did. But the basic tracks we would do live, and it was what it was. John Lee, great drummer. Man, what a great drummer. Tony Bolton, fantastic drummer in country radio. So I've been lucky with that too. Yeah, no, we had a groove and we'd been playing a lot. So that was a great thing about Melbourne in the time, that you were playing a lot, and so you knew the songs very well already. And by the time you got in the studio, you just knew them, and there was not much fuss. It wasn't like you would have a session and nothing got done. I don't remember actually how long it took. It was a lot of fun. I remember that. Great memory, just a great memory of getting these things down. And in that studio, there was these monster speakers, and you just can't believe how great you sound through those big speakers.
Yeah.
Then he puts it down on the little speakers, and it doesn't sound so. You say, please put it back on the big ones. But what he used to do that was irritating. Whatever was the fabulous new record of the day, like Joni Mitchell's "Caught and Spark," for example. He would play it on the big speakers before the session, making you feel like really tiny, really small. Such a great record, and now you got to go in and do your piddly little thing. You know what I mean? So
I listened to that a lot, to that self-titled Dingoes album, and I mean that opening track, "Come On Down," I wanted to bring attention to, and I mean the whole album as a whole is great as well. But I mean, in terms of your bass, why I bring that song up is that I think it really showcases your bass really well. The sound of it on that first album, I mean, it has a really rich, like deep noise, like it sound your bass on that album. Like, how did you get that sound? Like, what amps were you using? What bass were you using? Yeah.
You know what? I know on a couple of tunes on that. I know sure for Sydney Ladies, I used a Gibson. And generally, I use a precision bass, but I think I used a Gibson on that one. It's the Gibson looks like the SG Gibson, so it was a different sound. Thinking of "Free," "All Right Now," that tune. Yep. That's just a brilliant bass there, and I think that's the kind of sound that I was hoping to get. I'm not sure that I got that, but yeah.
Yeah,
no, the album sounds great. Yeah, he did such a wonderful job. I guess we were ready to do it, and I don't think we ever really surpassed that. I'm not sure. I'd have to A/B those albums. The ones we did, that one, and the 5 Times the Sun, and then Orphans of the Storm. I think we were pretty much, that title pretty much suggests where we were at in the band's history.
In Australian music, it was kind of like in that time in the 70s, it seems like we really started to really get that Australian sound, like our own sound. And I wanted to bring that up because, you guys weren't afraid to mention mention Australia directly in your songs, like Sydney Ladies. It seems like groups refrained, like Australian groups, refrained from mentioning Australia directly before that. I mean, why do you think that was? Yeah.
Oh, they had a name for it, the cultural cringe. Because everything that we listened to in the 50s and 60s pretty much was from, England or America. And it got so bad that the only way that you could get a record on radio was to cover, an American song that had already been made. It was almost not believed that Australians could, create their own stuff, like with the Easies, and we had something to do with it. The Angels, who's the Angels? Yeah, it just stopped happening. It just stopped. Like people just said, we're going to write our own stuff and we're going to, talk about what we know. There was a lot to say, as it turned out. And it wasn't just music, right? It was film. My God, me and Kerryn, we'd go and see a movie in Australia. Can you believe that's an Australian movie? No, yeah. And we just got good at it. And why did that happen? Don't really know. I don't really know. Maybe a younger generation. Gough Whitlam was a breath of fresh air. I know that. I don't really know. I don't know. But it was and is it still going on, right? Well, all music borrows from all other music and makes something original through the borrowing and through the changing, the mutation and the cross-cultural whatever. So that's always gone on. Maybe there was an acceptance of audiences to say, we're going to go out and see. Well, yeah, because before that scene in Melbourne, I think, the pub scene in Melbourne, before that, I'm not sure there was a music scene. I think that development, and what was that? That was really sort of the boomer generation coming out and demanding to have some, entertainment where you could, have a beer and listen to some good rock and roll. What was there before? I mean, I suppose there was some jazz clubs. I don't know really, but yeah, I think that's got to be part of the equation, is that there were venues. I remember the Q Club. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but this was a dance in Melbourne. There was no alcohol there or anything like that, but teens would go there, and there would be the Twilights playing, and I remember, and I would have been 15 or 16, something like that. But it was just a mass of age children coming of age and demanding a place to be social, you know.
Yeah.
So maybe that has something to do with it. It was a kind of a mini population boom. I know that schools at the time suddenly became filled and overfilled, and they had to make new schools. I went to Greythorne High School in North Balwyn, and that was a relatively new school. Students used to go to Balwyn High or Box Hill, and there was now a demand to have another school just because there was more kids. So maybe it's a demographic thing as well, you know. So shaking off the inferiority, a new demographic demanding that they have musicians that they enjoy and go and see. Probably at least both of those things, and some magical component of which I have no idea.
Another thing that was important was probably that Sunbury Festival, which you played at a few times. I think it's first time with Country Radio in '73, and of course in '74 with the Dingoes. What are some of your memories of playing at Sunbury?
I can't really think what it was like. You know, just a lot of people out there. I can remember being barefoot, having bare feet on stage, which is probably not a good idea. You know, I mean, there was so many musicians of a similar age, and so much, you know, alcohol, and there was other mind-altering substances too going on. You know, I mean, we were serious about wanting to play properly, and so we weren't, you know, blitzed or anything like that. And then again, the experience must have been such a sort of an electrical thing in your brain that maybe your brain doesn't even cope with it and says, "Nah, that didn't really happen," you know, and so you just don't remember it in a way. Kind of like once we were playing, the Dingoes was playing in Ohio, and there had been a rainstorm, and we were playing after the rainstorm, and I went up to the microphone and got a massive shock. It threw me back against the bass amp, and I kept playing, even though I was totally shocked. So maybe there's some erasure that goes on, you know, as you go through that. Yeah, so I don't know. But I did feel good for a couple of days after that. So it was a kind of shock treatment, really. And I tell you, we were playing in Perth, and there was a phone message, and the message was, "Call Paul McCartney at the Rolling Stones office." It couldn't be both. Could not be both. It was actually Billy McCartney, who was a road manager in Australia and had left to be a road manager in the United States. And so he was a roadie for Elvis and the Rolling Stones, and he would put on our record before the Stones came on. And you know, Mick would say, "Well, who's that? That's good," you know. And so the Stones manager, who also managed Lynyrd Skynyrd, got really interested, and it was the Rolling Stones office that I called. And the rest should have been history, but was not. You know, we went over there and played for a couple of years, but didn't really make a mark.
Yeah, well, look, in saying that too, I mean, you mentioned, of course, and you mentioned this in your book, and you told me a little bit earlier that that call that you got from Billy McCartney, thinking it was Paul McCartney, that's how you ended up going to the United States. And I was reading your book, and you tell some great stories in that, and there was like that 8-month gap between that call and getting on that jumbo jet to go to the United States, and I was kind of thinking, like, what was that 8 months like? Because I think, you know, the lawyer took some time to get the contracts together. You couldn't really make long-term plans in Australia due to that upcoming US trip. I mean, what was that 8 months like in Australia prior to?
Well, as it happened, he completely misunderstood what the deal was going to be, what they were offering us. He was saying, and he was adamant about it, you know, and he was saying that, you know, you don't want to sign this. The reason is because they're going to give you a whole lot of money. You're going to make your record, and if you don't make it, you're going to have to pay that money back for the rest of your lives. And everybody believed him, and I read the contract, and it said the opposite to me. So it wound up, you know, that was at least a couple of months of delay. It wound up, I said, "Listen, I'm going to call the lawyer in the United States and ask them, you tell me what words you want to see there, and I'll ask them to put in those words, because I believe that's what they want." And then, so after that, there was some delay, but it wasn't significant. What could audiences make of us? They knew that we had this huge deal in the offing. And as far as they were concerned, we were either celebrated nobodies or, you know, they just didn't know what to think. But yeah, so that dragged on. And that was fairly soul destroying, I would say. We weren't coming up with new songs. And the idea was, oh, well, so, you know, we've made it so far on these songs. Let's take them over to the United States and then do them. And I don't know, the stress maybe. Kerryn didn't write as much after that, and I didn't really contribute in any meaningful way. Stockley, who had written "Come On Down," you know, so we'd written a couple, but really the output had slowed down. understandably, because you're just living out of your suitcase all the time, not really feeling the love from the audiences, so we were always an opening act, so people would go there to see, who say Tom Petty, and we'd play and they'd be looking at us like, well, what is this, where are they from, they've got a funny accent, what is that Australian?
When you guys got to America, I mean, I think you arrived in San Francisco September '76. I mean, that second album, Five Times the Sun, that you recorded at the Wheels, his Master's Wheels studio. I mean, was the studio that you recorded that album in different to the ones in Australia, like in terms of like the technology available kind of thing? Yeah.
No, it's pretty much the same thing. Now, Elliot Mazer, the album that he had produced before us was Harvest, Neil Young, which is, it's a favorite of many people. And it's a great album. But his equipment, it was, I guess, the best that money could buy. But fundamentally, his technique was the same as John French was, to capture the moment in the studio. The live moment in the studio, record it well. You've got the good mics. So the mics were probably about the same level of goodness. Maybe there was more flexibility with the tracks, but then again, he wasn't a big guy for overdubbing. So we weren't layering tracks. We'd have a good live track, and that would be the band. We had some guest musicians come in and play. We had Garth Hudson from the band play with us.
Yep.
Nicky Hopkins, who played with John Lennon and the Rolling Stones. And it seemed like he could bring in anybody he wanted, and that was kind of cool. And that felt a little different. I don't think we didn't feel inferior about it. No, that was not the feeling. Yeah, but it was the same songs. That was maybe an issue. I think to keep growing, you've got to get new tunes all the time.
Yeah,
and we dried up a little bit like that, in part due to the vast delay that we'd experienced in Australia in moving on. We'd reached that point in Australia, and then there was like a 6-month gap, and now here we are in the United States. I think that hurt us, made us maybe a little skeptical of ourselves, perhaps.
Listening to Five Times the Sun, it sounds like you guys went to a more, like, you kind of moved a little bit away from that country rock sound to just an unusual, like the normal kind of rock sound that was going on in the United States at the time. Like, what inspired that? Do you think, like, it might just be my ears, but I mean, yeah, what inspired that? Yeah,
I'm trying to think. Okay, so he was dead country guy, Elliot Mazer, dead set country guy. He had recorded the band. He recorded the music for the band's farewell concert, and he'd recorded lots of great. He was from Nashville. I mean, he was a country guy. So it wouldn't have been something that he would have directed us to do. Having said that, the way we played a song, a track, a take, a version of a song called "A Boy on the Run" on the first album, an Australian album, is just it's just brilliant. The sound of it and the performance of it all. It's just really like fresh and good. And then we redid that on Five Times the Sun, and it's like unplugged. It's unplugged. So there's a couple of acoustic guitars, acoustic bass. I played the bass acoustically in that. It's actually an electric bass mic'd, but and I guess he just wanted to do something that was different. Perhaps that plays into it. No, I don't know. I don't know if I have the same take on that. Yeah, I don't think there was a move away from those influences. And I think that we've kind of held to those influences pretty consistently, even in our dotage, that I keep going back to those influences. It's the roots idea. If anything, I wanted to make the band be more folky, even like with fiddle, and banjo and stuff like that. And but you go through the moves, and we really had. I don't think that we felt that we were our own bosses in some way. In psychology, I teach psychology too. So in psychology, they talk about internal versus external locus of control. And I think in Australia, we were our own masters. We did what we know, and what we know is going to be good. No, we're going to do it this way. This is how it goes. In the United States, suddenly we're in the big time, and kind of everybody is got to have a big say. They've invested so much money in us, millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And they want their product, and they're not hearing it, So then, that's kind of scary right there. Suddenly it's like external locus of control. We've got to record something that makes them happy. There was nothing like that in Australia. We didn't care. People didn't like us. That was their problem, not ours. You shouldn't say that. That's not a good way for an entertainer to think, is it? I'm just saying that we were more ourselves, and as it happened, the audiences in Australia kind of like that, at least at the station hotel. Broderick was a total entertainer. He could imitate Johnny Weissmuller, he could imitate all kinds of people and just be really funny. The only time I can remember he did that in the United States was there was a massive snowstorm in Canada, and it was also a night of the Stanley Cup. And in Canada, when the Stanley Cup comes on, nobody's going anywhere except to a television to watch the Stanley Cup. So we were playing. There was nobody in the audience except these two older gentlemen sitting in the back. So Broderick puts on his dressing gown, sits in an armchair, and recites the songs a la Noel Coward, And it turns out that the people in the audience was Jerry Moss from A&M Records, who had made a special trip to come see us, Now, I don't know if that was something that stained us forever. Peter Rudge, our manager, thought that was kind of a career-building move, actually, that is a good story to tell. I don't know. So who knows? But no, so Broderick could be, he was always his own man. But as a band, I think that we felt the pressure. And, anxiety can be a positive force, can also be a negative force. Too much of it can be a negative force. You begin to feel like if you're disappointing people, we didn't ever feel that way in Australia. There was never any disappointment there. It was always, oh, good on you, boys. Yeah, this is good. Okay, let's release this one. Let's release that. Yeah, you're going on tour. They're going to love you there and so on. Didn't ever really have that feeling in the United States. What we should have had was a hit record already. Easier said than done, but yeah, if you go to a new country with a hit record, then you've got this sort of opening to people see you and already kind of made up their mind about you. I really believe the only reason they signed us was because Peter Rudge, Skinner and Rolling Stones manager, was our manager. And I think that's, they didn't have any investment beyond that. Yes, they invested money, but in terms of, their people wanting to sign us, I don't think that was it. As far as they were concerned, Peter Rudge was managing us, and he would make or break us, and then our records would sell, and then they would cash in on it.
In terms of singles released in the US, from what I could, and this I was just looking on Discogs for this, I had all your list of your singles, and it seems like the only one that came out in the United States was Smooth Sailing. Am I right on that?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And I think that came out at the same time as Sultans of Swing. And so when you're talking about the jocks, they had the Dingoes and they had Sultans of Swing. And I think that at least that was the story that we were told at the time. I think that's right. And Smooth Sailing, it's a great rock tune, but alongside Sultans of Swing, Sultans of Swing has got this whole other story to it. The guitar, oh my God, Mark Knopfler was just the beginning of a genius career. Listening
to Smooth Sailing, but also then listening to the original Australian version of Way Out West, I've always thought the Australian version of Way Out West should have been the single. I mean, because it sounds unique. I mean, it was perfect for that kind of country southern kind of thing going on. I mean, do you think that would have brought the band more success had that been released instead of Smooth Sailing? Yeah.
I do think so. It's the lyrics are so right on the money, and nothing much to do on a Saturday night, get into some booze and maybe a fight. I mean, that's sort of classic country, iconic lyrics that people would have in Australia. Yeah, they've gotten it, but I don't think there's anything like that on Smooth Sailing. Both written by the same songwriter, right? But I have, just to be honest, I don't know what Kerryn would say about that, but the lyrics of Way Out West are, they're one of a kind, and they evoke something. And Smooth Sailing, it's a good rock tune. But I would have to agree with you. I think that if that original Way Out West had been released, that might have been different. Now, on that album, there are some great tunes, great lyric tunes that were not even included on the American album that maybe should have been. But but you want to try something new, and we were really listening to the producer. We were really, he picked us up. I mentioned this in the book. He picked us up from the airport when we arrived and said, and Fleetwood Mac came on the radio. It was one of the huge hits that they had. And it came on the radio, and Elliot Mazer, to his credit, making us feel good, said, "You guys are going to be bigger than this." So, he lied too.
That second album, the first one done in the US, was a positive. Like, there was a positive feeling about it. I mean, when you got to the third album, I think it's mid 1978 by this point, Orphans of the Storm. What was the feeling in the band? Because I think Chris had left by this point. I mean, yeah, what was the feeling during the recording process of Orphans of the Storm? Yeah.
So we had been away from Australia for a couple of years? Really just sort of socially adrift, homeless, vagabonds on the world stage, and not really having put down any roots anywhere. Apartment here, a house there, moving, and then tour, and then, so we were sort of really, men without a country. We were staying in a hotel called the Empire Hotel in New York City, and it was not a ritzy joint at all. We would run out of money halfway through the week, and we'd be recording. It was the time when the Rolling Stones had this hit, "Miss You." That was going on in the streets, and it was kind of exciting in the Hit Factory because they had the greatest bass sound in it. So I no complaints on that. But again, we were kind of retracing some of our tracks. I contributed songs now that I wish I had not of. That those were like my first full songs. I wrote one with Kerryn, which is not a classic by any stretch. I will say, before we tried it at the Hit Factory, we went to this other studio, Atlantic Studios, and they had a great track record, and we were going to produce ourselves there. That was the plan. And so we did a couple of rough demos and sent them to A&M, and A&M rejected it, said, no, we got to get you a producer. And they got this guy, John Anthony, who had produced, I think, Ace or somebody like that. And he was a house producer. So when we had Elliot Mazer, Elliot was his own guy. He produced whatever he wanted to produce. Whereas John Anthony, if memory serves, he was a house producer for A&M, so he would produce what they told him to produce. And so I'm not sure that he really had any direct line into our band. I don't really feel like he was musical compatriot in the same way that John French or Elliot Mazer was. Now he was a great guy, but there's a very sort of artificial feel about those tracks. I think they don't really come from anywhere. They're just you're in the studio. You go into this hotel at night, and then you're back in the studio, and you go into this hotel at night. And so I don't really have that fond of memory of the process there. Halfway through it, or just even a third of the way through it, the engineer left the project. So I'm not sure that he was hearing it either. I don't even know if that's what happened, but he was no longer there. And, engineers are important in it. And we had Stockley not being there. That turned out to be a mistake because Stockley was really a core part of the ethos of the band. He was the sort of hard edge rock and roll guy, and just driven and funny as hell. What a beautiful guy. We replaced him with two guys, and they were great guys too, but they weren't Stockley. And Stockley was, because we'd formed in Australia, it was sort of almost like a supergroup, right? He'd come from Axiom, Kerryn from Country Radio, me from Country Radio, and Broderick, from Carson, and John Lee from, Ariel, here we've been playing with. So we were kind of our own stars in our own mind, at least, But Stockley was sort of a part of that kind of chemistry. But he had gotten, and through this process, I think of anybody, he had gotten the most psychological stress from the changes that we had to go through. So he went back to Australia, and suddenly the chemistry is different. He's still making music, but it's just not the same. So it's not their fault, not anybody's fault, but it was different.
In saying that too, I mean, you touched on that. You wrote some songs for the album, and I think the last single, "Into the Night," the last single by the Dingoes, was completely written by you. I mean, like, was that a good moment for you having your song as the single? Like, how did you feel about that? Yeah.
You know what? I was incredibly flattered, and I could see that Kerryn's nose was really out of joint, and it should have been too, because it's not a good song. But it was kind of dramatic in a New York kind of way, a little bit. And I don't really have good feelings about that whole experience, other than I remember at the time feeling that that was a direct infusion to my ego, which I didn't feel was, really earned that much. So somebody tells you you're the greatest thing, and suddenly, we're going to use your single. You go, oh wow, really? Gee, I don't know. It's a great rush, but beyond the rush, there was not much there to back it.
Yeah, and look, just before we go, I wanted to just draw attention. Of course, you mentioned a few times your latest records, and of course, 2016 you had Tassie Wolf, followed by If I'd Gone to Nashville in 2019, and the most recent work of art in 2022. And of course, you mentioned a few times that you've got this upcoming one, and I was kind of thinking, like, what can you tell me about that upcoming album? And can you share the title or anything? Like, is it all?
I think it's called Noir and Blues. So it's the noir from like film noir,
Yeah,
because it's got some dark tunes on it. There's one that's a murder ballad. I don't know if you know some of the classic murder ballads in the folk canon, like 10 years ago on a cold, dark night. But anyway, so I've written a murder ballad that I'm kind of proud of, and it's got a twist at the end. So there's more stories. Some of my, I don't know if you've heard on Work of Art, there's a song about the invasion of Peru, which is a story. So I'm telling more stories as time goes on. I've also written a song that's about Vietnam. It came from, I was driving along and I saw those flags. I don't know if you've seen them. They have them on Australia, MIA, POW, prisoners of war, missing in action. People are still waiting for their soldiers to come home. And so I thought, oh shit, really? Is there somebody still waiting after all this time? So there was the song, and the first verse is, she will never love another man, though he was dead or alive in Vietnam. She said one day she will know, but until then, she's not going to let him go. And so it's a song about Vietnam, and it's sort of mildly patriotic, but also it's she's angry at the TV hawks that are trying to sell the war that they don't have to fight in. Anyway, so it's a song about Vietnam. So again, it's another story song. So, and there's a couple more that are really stories. There's one called The Coal Miner's Diamonds, which has a twist at the end. So yeah, more stories.
The track that I love of all your stuff is Cherry Blossom off your recent record. I really dig it. I think it's great. I was just kind of thinking, like, how did it come to be? Like, what was the story behind it? Yeah.
Oh, I'll tell you what. The that of all of my songs, that one has got sort of the most neat tied in part. Like it's always at the end. There's this passing of time and things disappear very quickly. Well, I lived in DC.
G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with bass player of the Dingoes, John Bois. After being in bands such as The New Dream and Country Radio, John joined the Dingoes in 1973. The band would go on to be known for their song Way Out West and being one of the first Aussie groups to attempt to make it in America. After making an album in Australia and 2 albums in the US, the group would disband in 1979. Today, John is a school teacher in the US and in 2012 wrote a book about his time in the band. You're born in 1950 in Hobart. Like, what do you remember of growing up in Hobart? Yeah.
No, I grew up in Melbourne. I think my mother took me there to birth me for some reason. I don't know particularly why, but no, I was brought up in Melbourne.
What was Melbourne like growing up? Do you have any memories that pop up for you, like those early memories? Yeah.
Well, let's see. The first place I can remember was out in Clayton, where Monash University is out that way. And it was just very bare and, no trees growing, and it was very new development. And then we moved to Surrey Hills, hung out there until I got to be, playing in bands. And then I was all over the place.
In terms of your early childhood, like what was the music you were growing up with? Yeah.
I think the radio was really